So we have about 15 minutes for final questions, mainly for the ministry folks who are speaking this afternoon. Any questions?
Hi, it's for Peggy. It's about the communication protocol for risk assessment. So what do you, I know we talked about administrative fairness, but what do you consider how many responses to the question? So you send out your package, you get the questions back, you send the answers, and some people you're never going to satisfy. So how do we as AP know where to draw the line? We're not really in the position to do your job.
Well, I think that's the key question. It's the reasonableness. And I guess my first comment is maybe, a letter campaign is not the right way to communicate in that circumstance. If people really do have issues, then probably meeting with them directly is better. And even better if they have an environmental consultant to bring along with them. But at the end of the day, you may still have a situation where you feel that the issues that are being raised, or not you, but the responsible party feels that the issues that are being raised are unreasonable. And then at that point, you would have to look, and there's this kind of a delicate dance here in the role of the AP in all of this, but assuming that the communication is going back largely between the responsible party and the affected property owner, and guided by the environmental consultant, that those issues would have to have relevance under EMMA. So these are decisions that are being made under EMMA. So that example that I used about the numerical standards, that's a classic issue that comes up on these sites. I want my site cleaned up to numerical standards. Well, that doesn't have relevance under EMMA. Might, on certain sites, it might be the only solution to meet human health and environmental concerns on a particular site. Or a responsible party may be prepared to do that level of cleanup. But on another site, it may not have relevance, and it may be adequate to clean up that site to risk-based standards. I'm not sure about what you're thinking, but really that's what it comes down to. And the question of administrative fairness, the burden, if there's a solution that requires a landowner to maintain access to their site for monitoring wells, for example, then is it appropriate in that particular circumstance to expect that landowner to provide that service? Those are questions that would have to come up. Or maintaining pavement. I guess an obvious one would be in downtown Vancouver, in an area where there's land development all around, and a landowner in that circumstance maybe says, I don't have a permit in with the city of Vancouver right now, but I have, here I've got, here I'll show you my development plans. Well, that's reasonable for them to say that it's maybe not in the works right now, but I'm well along the way to working towards this development. In that case, probably the reasonable future use of that site would involve that development going through. It's really case by case.
Thanks, Peggy. Guy?
Related to that, your response, Peggy, isn't it true that your site, after it's received a risk-based certificate, is still legally contaminated? But isn't there a diminution of property value? Aren't you opening up CSAP to potential litigation, or being involved in litigation, which we aren't now? But I'm not too keen on this, for that reason. And I know maybe it's outside of your jurisdiction, but I don't think that's fair for CSAP to be now run.
I think, we're a backstop. So we're a backstop when situations arise that really are not straightforward. And I think, at the end of the day, when the best effort has been made and it's still deemed that the responses are unreasonable, and you know, a project is being held up, then perhaps that's a time to bring the situation forward to the ministry. That's just a comment there. The whole, you know, just like I discussed the permits, the passing down of responsibilities, it really is the responsibility of the source site owner to be communicating and dealing with the issues of the neighbor. That's not the ministry's responsibility. So it's similar to the permits that I discussed, where consultation is a requirement of the permittee. But the AP's role in this, I can understand.
I just have a comment. I agree it's the responsibility of the owner, but I don't agree that it's the responsibility of the first professional. Like, to be doing this kind of negotiation, etc., that's fine, you can put it on the owner, but not the AP. We're not in a ministry job where you do have to deal with those complaints, whatever, from disgruntled landowners that are affected parties, as we call them. But that's not the role of the AP in my mind. And I agree with Guy. I think it puts us in a horrible position. You could tell the landowner it's their position or their responsibility, which it is. But I don't see how you can tell professionals that it's our responsibility. It's not our responsibility, it's the landowner's responsibility. We can assist them, but I don't think it's our responsibility.
To review those records?
To initiate this process that you're talking.
Well, the APs aren't responsible for initiating the process. That process is defined in the guidelines. And requirements for communication, the requirements that I referred to in my talk, those requirements have been in effect for many years now. The role of the AP would be reviewing the records to see that appropriate communication had occurred, and that if there were reasonable concerns affecting human health and the environment or affecting the conclusions of any risk assessment, that those were identified and potentially would need to be addressed.
But isn't it true that you're sidestepping it because you don't like to get into the legal side of people getting into arguments about loss of property values, etc., and you're putting us squarely in the middle of that?
We're not sidestepping it because of that. We're sidestepping it because these are not high-risk sites. It was a big ministry workload dealing with these properties, and they're not, for the most part, they're not high-risk sites. And there's actually a number of APs who come to the ministry on several occasions and ask for the opportunity to have them go through the P6 process. So I'm not sure if everybody has the same. I understand your nervousness. Perhaps it's working through what's the responsibility of the responsible parties in this whole process, and what's the role of the AP.
Hi, Peggy, I think a little bit, I'm understanding what some of my colleagues are saying is part of the role as APs, yeah, we can go in and look at it and say to our client, the responsible party, yeah, we think you've done everything. But I think the idea is we shouldn't be the ones making the decision. You know what? We've done everything. We're going to put this instrument through. Because if we make this decision to put the instrument through, it gets issued, and there's a diminution of property value. The fear is that they're going to say, well, you are the decision maker as the AP. We're going to sue you. And as a ministry, people are protected. As a statutory decision makers, you have that protection. We don't have that same level of protection. We have the indemnity, but it's not the same.
I think one answer, and I don't know if this is an adequate answer, but where there are circumstances and applications come through P6 where there is no agreement from an affected property owner, but there is a belief on the part of the AP that the process has been carried out as it's described and the guidance would instruct you to observe it, then, or to do that. In that case, the ministry could be issuing draft instruments. So we just need to know this is a circumstance where there was no agreement, and in all of those circumstances, the ministry would then issue. So the ministry would take on the role at the end of the day on carrying that final step of communication. I don't know if that makes it easier for people or not.
This is a question for John, not for Peggy. John, the upstream oil and gas industry in northern BC, it's a big industry. By and large, it's run out of Calgary. The operators don't probably know much or see much relevance in the land remediation section or in our society, or much value in it. How can we work together to improve that and change it?
Actually, it's a question.
Good try, Peggy.
Already quit passing the buck.
Peggy is the queen of oil and gas.
Oh, well.
Peggy, I tried it.
Yeah, come on, John, give it your best shot.
I've been asked it first. Okay. And I want to have a supplementary on your last question. Just so you know, these administrative fairness requirements, we cannot delegate them to anybody. You know, we can't delegate our responsibilities. We can't be fettered. We can't do anything. If I just delegated our responsibility for administrative fairness on a decision to an approved professional, I would be derelict in my duty. But then that would mean I'd just be accepting your recommendation blindly. I can't do that. You saw my points. I have to look at it independently, all those different points. Okay, now, the oil and gas. Oil and gas is, something came across my desk a couple of weeks ago, and there's new accounting procedures coming in for government agencies that I think are coming into effect either 2014 or 2015. And the government agencies are expected to book their liabilities for contamination on Crown lands and on government lands. So this is going to apply to all governments, agencies in BC, including the Oil and Gas Commission and the forestry people and the mining people and all those people. So that's going to provide some impetus for people to start paying a little more attention to that. I guess the other point is voluntarily some people who are responsible for oil and gas drilling sites come to us, and there's a number of sites Peggy's been involved in, and I think Column's been involved in some of them as well. So it's not totally across the board it's being ignored, but that's where we are now, and more could be coming. I mean, we've had meetings with oil and gas staff in Fort St. John over the years. We have regular meetings with, what's it called, the BC UPAC committee. So there's communications going on all the time. So do you want to add anything more to that? Okay, she doesn't want to add anything to it. Maybe.
Thanks, John. Any more questions?
Might be more of a comment, but back to the communication business, but an easier one. It may not be clear in the procedure, but I was wondering, is in the situation where arm's length is still required, which aren't that many, does the AP have to be arm's length in the communication part? You mentioned meetings as the best process, but I'm thinking it's maybe does need to be arm's length, hence they wouldn't be able to be at those meetings. But you might want to clarify the procedure on whether it's required.
Yeah, that's a really good, I thought of that one myself, actually.
And then the other one for CSAP is whose responsibility is it that communication has occurred? Is it the risk AP or the standards, or both the risk and the standards AP? Because it's really just a risk issue, right? So I'm not sure there's an answer to that too, and maybe that also would go into a clarification. So no hard questions.
Any response on that, Peggy, or is that just a comment? Okay. Other questions?
I have this question for Peggy. So communication-wise, when a letter was sent out, if the letter didn't express opinion, just say, I received your letter, we'll get back to you later. How much do we require the owner to pursue the second, with the second letter to say, hey, such date, you said you received this, do you have any response? Or we can just leave it there and...
Well, since we've been giving people the Appendix 2, I think for quite some time now, we've been handing out Appendix 2 with the guidance for what information needs to be shared, and also that process of sending the registered letter, waiting 30 days, and then following up a second time, and then waiting another 30 days, and then sending it in after that if you get no response at all. That's been followed. Lots of people are following that, and we've had, until now we've got P6, which is not directing those to the ministry. There have been a number of applications that have carried out communication in that manner.
Say if somebody's replies to you, say, give me half a year to study this, literally. Say, okay, I need to work with my consultant, with my lawyer, to study this issue, and we'll get back.
Yeah. Communicate early, communicate often, communicate fully. That's where it comes back to haunt you if you leave this till the last minute. So there's a recommendation there, again, back to the parties that are responsible to know this is a requirement for obtaining an instrument, and seek to build a relationship with those parties. But a lot of times these are really low-risk sites that a lot of these applications involve roadways, little bits of contamination that's migrated onto roadways. So, when you're starting to get into higher risk situations, you really need to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis. But there really are circumstances where it's not too complicated.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Peggy, just a follow-up to that. From your slides, if the third party is non-responding, and we demonstrate that to you, is from your slide, the ministry, it looks like they'll then put together draft conditions and send it to the third party with another 30-day time period. Is that a default, or do you retry yourself for first 30 days and then send the conditions? I'm trying to resolve if it's 30 or 60 days. I think our experience was 60, but that was earlier, and if it's zeroed in on 30.
Well, I'm hearing that the process really, and John's come forward, even though we took it out of P6 and we were recognizing non-high risk sites, they shouldn't be coming to the ministry. This administrative fairness piece that really is something that the ministry has to fulfill ourselves. I think we've arrived at the point where when there's no agreement, then the ministry is going to have to send those instruments out for another 30 days. So you're talking 90 days, because it's 60 days before it comes into us, and you add another 30 days on top of that.
Okay, so it's just one round of 30 days by the ministry, so it's 90 altogether. It helps in planning with our client.
I was going to say, we're making this up as we go along. I've been signing these things off, your recommendations for over 6 months now. I haven't seen one like this. Okay? So we're not talking about a frequent experience. We're talking very rare. So, we can deal with them on a case-by-case basis. We don't have to make rules now.
Well, we've had a few like that, Peggy and I.
Yeah, but that's a ministry submission.
Right.
These are approved professional, normal, non-high risk sites. So we don't have to get we don't have to get all bent out of shape for if it's not happening. We'll deal with it when it comes.
It sounds like there's probably a need for more communication around this.
Lots of very exciting.
Change the liability.
Peggy, in light of administrative fairness, if I was not a knowledgeable person about contaminated sites and contamination came onto my property and I was told I had 30 days to respond, I don't think I would call that fair, considering the person who's probably approaching me has hired a consultant, has a professional working for them, and I'm supposed to come up to speed and respond within 30 days. So I see this process stretching out much longer than what you're currently envisioning.
We don't necessarily know what kind of communication goes on now before these applications come to us. There could have been years of communication. So there's a lot that could go on. There's a lot that does go on that we have no idea about. So, and John's correct. We really have been trying to come up with a process. We were requested to find ways to have non-high-risk sites be reviewed under P6, and that was the reason for this latest effort.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, here you go, Guy.
My question actually has to do with this morning, if I may, at Amy's and Annette's presentation. But maybe Peggy can answer, I don't know. An overview comment, those scenarios, things are getting more complicated in the way we're doing. They are. All these little scenarios and little nuances of the aquitard and factoring up the size. Instead of going to a simpler way of doing things, I see this as I think it's going in the wrong direction. Let me give an example. The bedrock scenario, now we have to put in at least 6 wells into bedrock and test them. And I think those of us that have done a proper bedrock study know that that's not trivial. That costs big bucks. And if you want to do it right, according to whatever guidance we have out there, you're going to be packer testing, and it's going to get complicated. And we have a lot of sites like in Victoria, which shouldn't have to be so complicated, but now they are. I shouldn't say this, but my own well is in rock and it's 100 meters deep. And I can probably pack off little zones and show that my conductivity is less than 10 to the minus 10 meters a second. But I know that'd be baloney. There is a lot of merit in, and I know I've heard this before, that it can't be done, but we need to map out areas. We need to map out the Quadra sand in Vancouver and just give us a break. Here's what standards apply and here's what one don't. Salt Spring Island, just the whole thing's drinking water. Just don't make us drill 6 holes at every little site. That's ridiculous. We need a holistic approach here that's going to make life easier, and it can be done, especially in the lower mainland here. There's hundreds and hundreds of boreholes drilled by consultants here back to the 50s. It's just a matter of letting a contract and letting some of us pull that info together and agreeing on it.
So we put forward, and that's a fabulous, I love your comment, even though it's a little bit critical of our process, but anyway, maybe it's a lot critical, but, and send your comments around bedrock, because bedrock really is a complicated one for us to deal with. We would love to have mapping done. When we had that little workshop a couple years ago for TG6 and coming up with teams and priority issues, Ministries was mapping, and we ended up number 6 out of 6. So we've been asking for assistance. When we were dealing with iron and manganese, we asked people to bring forward as much information as they could, and there were some fantastic people who helped us in that regard. We have the same issue with mapping, and when we meet with Canadian Fuels, when we meet with the stakeholders and with CSAP, we would like to have a process that would allow us to move forward with mapping areas, particularly in Vancouver. So we put forward some money in our budget this year to do a contract for mapping. And I don't know, it's a provisional budget, we haven't got it approved yet, we don't know if we got enough money, but it's a start for us, and we'll probably be coming back to CSAP to see, let's scope this out and what's the best way to go forward. So great suggestion.
Peggy, so it's just an example, you could wrap out much of Delta, parts of Richmond on DW based on salinity, right? And then you could map that. And like Mike Wee's group, I don't know, they let out some big contract for aquifer mapping. That's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, in 1 year, right? So if they can come up to figure out where aquifers are in Fort Nelson, we should be able to figure out where aquifers aren't.
So that's a great suggestion, and we were working with Mike Way's group, and we know that they're doing work on mapping
right?
different criteria.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to say what's an aquifer, and it's another to say what an aquifer isn't.
I'm just saying they're tossing good six-figure resources at mapping where potable resources are in the province where people aren't. You know? Well, like there aren't a lot of people in around Fort Nelson, right?
Okay, any other questions before we wrap up?
One thing, there's no requirement to put in 6 wells in a bedrock aquifer. The use of 6 wells is if you want to deviate from TT8. That is if you want to use the geometric mean to calculate your yield. You can put in, I can't say you can put in 1 well, depends on your site, but you can put in 1 well, let's say, and use your maximum value, and if that's lower than 10 to the minus 6, you're good. You can also use data from another site, you just have to go through us. So you don't have to have 6 wells, you don't even need to maybe investigate. Just to clarify that.
Thanks for that clarification.
You wrote it, yeah.
Okay, if that's about it for questions, I'd like to thank the ministry for their input this afternoon and late this morning. Lavinia, Amy, Annette, John, Glenn, Peggy, Colum, and Carrie, thank you very much. And of course, all the other ministry folks who were talking to everybody during the day, thank you very much for coming out as well. Much appreciated. And I guess that's about our wrap for today. Thank you all for coming out, and we'll see you next time.